Welcome to the Hud Grad Club. I'm Chris Webb, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Career Consultant with the University of Huddersfield's Careers Employability Service. And, full disclosure, I'm also a University of Huddersfield graduate. So I've generally got pretty positive things to say about both the institution and any of our graduates. But don't take my word for it. In this podcast, we'll be meeting different members of the University of Huddersfield's global alumni community, finding out what makes them tick, about their experiences during their time at the university and their career journeys since completing their studies. Join us as we explore the inspiring, innovative and diverse range of individuals that make up the Hud Grad Club. Hello and a very warm welcome to the latest episode of the Hud Grad Club, our podcast celebrating the University of Huddersfield alumni community. And as you can see, it's a very special episode of the podcast today because we are actually in person live on campus at the beautiful Osler building with slightly gloomy views today, it has to be said. And I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Sidding. So Mark, a very warm welcome to you.
Good morning, Chris. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
For anyone who's maybe watching or listening to the podcast who's not come across you before or your work, can you just tell us a little bit more about what you did at the university and what you're up to now?
What did I do at university? So I studied architecture at university. So I was landed here 34 years ago in Huddersfield. And I was kind of dropped off. I remember being dropped off by my dad and saying, right, there you go, off you go. So I then studied building studies, did a HND in building studies. And I was kind of a serial graduate. So I graduated in 92, 94, 97, 98, and 99. I eventually made it in 99. So I studied architecture. But within architecture, there's a number of years out. So it is quite a protracted course, quite a long course that you need to go on. But actually those years out are so valuable because what I found was you can learn all sorts of things within university. And it's a great course. Understanding about design, about technology, how the bits of materials and buildings fit together. But that's great in a university setting. But there's nothing like actually going out into practice to really understand actually what you don't know rather than actually what you've been taught. So there were a couple of years out that I did in industry. The first year out was a little bit tricky because there was a recession at that time. The second year out was more fruitful, working in architectural practice. And then graduating in 1999, so class of 99.
Yes, class of 99 and the rest.
And the rest, yes, absolutely, yes.
Always difficult. One of our graduates that would be difficult to contact through kind of mailing lists. Which would you be under? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. No, I think because it's the masters, it's like, and one of the things one piece of advice I got very early on when I was like 16, 17 is, do your best, get as far as you possibly can, and climb to as high as you possibly can in terms of your understanding, your qualifications as well. And that was one thing that kind of drove me through university because it's a long time, sort of 9, 10 years to keep going. So you kind of need that, and I will come on to this a little bit later, absolutely, a bit of passion and a bit of purpose behind it.
Yeah, and as you said, we will definitely kind of dig into that a little bit more as we kind of talk through your career journey. I think particularly that journey into architecture, as you said, and kind of what that looked like. As you mentioned, quite a long,
it is long,
kind of onerous route, but also something, as you said, that you care deeply about, which is what allowed you to kind of continue moving through it. We do start the podcast each time, as always, with our greatest Hud story section. Okay. So this is very much about key memories from your time at university. Any sort of special memories you might want to share on the podcast. So any Hud stories you'd like to while we're here.
So we go back you're talking 30 years ago, so the campus was completely different. So for those that can remember the old sports centre, so I was part of the archery team back then. I'll come on a little bit later about the works I've done on the campus around that as well. The Black Hole, for those, do you remember the Black Hole?
Not at all.
Not at all. So it was a Students' Union building, which was just next to the workshop block. And there was a really good reason why it was called the Black Hole. It was actually an old primary school, which was converted into 2 bars, first floor and ground floor. And yeah, it was dark, it was smelly, but it was great fun. It was really good fun. So there's always those times when you go into the Black Hole, which is the Students' Union. And the other thing, because of the course, because it's quite intensive on time, deadlines, etc. One of the endearing memories we had in workshop block 5, which is, architecture's moved around the campus a little bit since then. We used to do lock-ins. So we used to stay overnight, and the security guards used to lock us in, and we used to just work all the way through the night, which obviously you can't do now.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I was at university, very similar. My flatmate was doing museum and exhibitions,
right? Yeah,
different university, but yeah, she had the same things, and it felt bizarre to me for the course that I was on, and yeah, I assumed it doesn't happen anymore. But
no, I don't think it was the same.
Yeah, I can imagine
as well. But I think it was, for me, the endearing memories of those first few years when you're trying to find your feet as a new student. It's a new town, it's a new place, you're on your own. Where do you go? I even remember standing in St George's Square asking someone where the train station was, and it's just kind of finding that fit. But that's all part of, for me, the adventure of going to university and actually trying to build a little bit of resilience within yourself as well. Because 30 years ago, no Wi-Fi, no mobile phones,
absolutely,
no internet. You had to put like a 10p piece into the old phone to ring your parents back then. You literally were on your own, and you had to find your own values, your own resilience, your own perseverance through those initial challenges.
And I think that connects really nicely to kind of coming back to architecture now, particularly the stuff around perseverance, resilience, because I know for you, that kind of journey to become an architect, it was something that you were always very passionate about, which, I know we talked off the podcast, can be kind of quite unusual for people to have that drive from such a young age towards a particular pathway. But it was something that you kind of saw, okay, this is going to take a long time, and you were prepared for it. So talk us through a little bit more, I guess, around, what did that journey look like from, first of all, I guess, becoming interested in architecture to then qualifying?
So I've always been interested in kind of the built environment. Even with a kid, it affects everybody so much, and even when you don't realize it's affecting you, it's actually affecting you. And we did in graphical communications, as it was called, back when I was 16, I think. We did a subject around architecture, and we had to go and design and draw a house. And I was fascinated, absolutely taken aback by the ability to create space that actually affects people's moods and how they feel and how they live and how they communicate with each other. And it was that, wow, that's a real positive. So from that point onwards, I kind of looked at different architecture. I was looking up. It's interesting, we don't look up enough. Even in Huddersfield, I know, the main street isn't great at the moment, but actually when you look up, that's where you kind of see the beauty in some of the buildings, some of the architecture that you see that actually can affect you. So from quite an early age, at sort of O-level stage, I was quite taken by this ability to create space, whether it's external or internal space, that actually can then affect people's lives as well. And I guess that was kind of the start of the journey. And I guess if you really dug down into all architects, what do they really want to do? I think we just want to change the world, for the better. Well, that was certainly the way I wanted to do, but I appreciate it was a long journey at university. And I hung on to that because I actually didn't do that. I wasn't particularly academic at A-levels. So I failed my A-levels. So again, well, what do I do then? So then I went through clearing, which I know a lot of students go through clearing. And it's not a bad thing, and actually can give you a variety more options than you thought about. And somebody said, have you thought about doing building studies, which is kind of the technical aspect of architecture? And I thought, well, that's really, I'm not going to get into architecture straight away. And I thought, well, why not? I'm still passionate about buildings and the built environment. Let's learn how they get put together first. And it's interesting, I only found out that I was on the course on the Friday. The term started on the Monday.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. So you can imagine, like,
turnaround.
It's a really, really big turnaround. But again, you kind of look at how you look back and see how these very favorable moments in your life work out. That back at home with the church we were in at home, there was a friend of ours who'd literally just finished the same course at the same university and had a bed spare or a bedroom spare for 2 weeks before I came. And it just
serendipity,
you'll call it providence, whatever you want, whatever you want. So that's where it comes back to. I landed in Huddersfield 34 years ago, and then it's about how do you capture that essence of purpose and passion in what you do. Now, being kind of arty, I think that kind of comes to the surface quite quickly. But then when you're looking at other courses and other aspects of that, I still believe you do need, beyond the title, beyond the remuneration, beyond the salary and all those other nice bits and pieces you get, there's always going to be a challenge. There's always going to be days when you don't want to go to work. There's always going to be days when you don't feel like putting that bit of effort in. But I always believe there needs to become a landmark moments in your life that you look back on and think, actually, that's why I'm doing it.
And so for you, what did that sort of look like? Because, as you've said there, absolutely rightly, a lot of kind of stuff is talked about online around, purpose, finding purpose, making it sound like it's something very straightforward. But of course, as you said, actually something very complex. And I guess for you, sort of, what was that kind of driving factor, as you said, that went beyond that idea of, a job title, an industry title for architecture? What did that sort of look like?
So for me, it's always about trying to give something back to society or to those around you. And I didn't kind of stumble into education design as an architect. I've always kind of quite interested in it. But interestingly, my first project, and my year out project as my part 3 project, was actually the Howard Wilson building at Huddersfield University. So you're going, oh, wow, that's a really great kind of full circle. The fact that I was able to take the skills and the knowledge and understanding around the built environment and actually give something back to where I actually studied as well. Unfortunately, it's a bit still stood. So many architects you talk about, my first building was demolished in XXX. It's still there. And from there, I was able, we actually did Student Central as well. So it's then about being able to take your skills and ability, your passion, and actually give it back. Certainly for me, it was such a privilege to actually give it back to the university that I actually studied in and see all the thousands of students that are going to come through the buildings and actually then positively affecting those lives of those students as they study.
And I guess that's a very different aspect to a profession like architecture, I suppose, where you've got that kind of very tangible immediate legacy. You're seeing physically the impact that you've had on the environment, on people, that perhaps with some jobs it maybe takes a little bit more to kind of look into that, how have I made an impact? Whereas that must feel, I guess, particularly special, looking up and thinking, that's mine, or partly mine.
I think one of the biggest landmark moments for myself is why I continued in education was we did some schools for Leeds a number of years ago. Nothing special, not award-winning, not after awards, but we went back into one of the schools after it had been opened. And it was a very moving moment, actually, and it always gets me kind of here, is that we walked into one of the classrooms. The kids were so excited about their new school. For us, it's like, well, it's just a school. But for them, you could see this excitement about these new spaces. And went into the classroom. And the teacher was there setting up for the new school year. And the kids said, Miss, this is the bloke, this is him. What do you mean this is him? This is the architect. And she burst into tears. I was like, wow, what's that all about? And she said to me, she'd never thought in all the years of teaching, because they come from a really old Victorian primary school, that she would be able to teach children in a space like this. And it's like, wow. And again, I say it's a privilege because you don't get many moments in life like that, where actually somebody comes directly back to you and thanks you for actually what you do as a day job.
And I guess, as you say, sort of validating then, those thoughts you have about that impact that space and buildings can make on people's mood, because I guess, you could say you get into something for a particular reason, but that, I suppose, really helps validate it, doesn't it? Go, do you know what, everything I thought?
That
absolutely.
Really backs it up. But then what that does, it gives you a springboard to say, actually, no, I'm going to continue. And actually, I'm going to try and improve how we improve those environments and those spaces. But I think people should try and take that out of architecture, out of what I've seen, and actually really reflect on, well, what do you do? Whether you're a computer analyst, whether you're a social worker, whether you are a manager somewhere else, there's always got to be that edge, that difference to coming back to why do I do what do I do? Because for me, it has to be all about that why. And blessed I've got that why. And even now we're delivering numerous schools this year and a lot of special educational needs schools, which is very close to my heart because obviously one of our lads is special educational needs. So you can see it from a parental perspective as well as a professional perspective, and that ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and walk a mile in their shoes and understand what they're going through, so that actually you can adapt and change your approach to improve their life.
And this really sort of resonates, I guess, with everything we talk about as careers professionals when it comes to your career. It's not these separate pockets. Work is separate, there's personal view, you know, that there is that sort of two leaking into each other, as you say, often in a very positive way.
Yes.
Where you've got things you care about that you can bring to your work scenario, whatever that might look like, and vice versa. So
yeah, no, absolutely.
Really, really interesting. So brilliant, Mark. You know, you've talked a lot there about some of the key things, I guess, that have been really important for allowing you to make that kind of journey through your career in architecture. So particularly that kind of power of purpose and how that's sort of underpinning everything. But also you mentioned earlier, obviously, that, you know, that resilience, that perseverance to be able to kind of work through the challenges when sort of times get tough.
Yeah.
You mentioned, you know, lots of different graduating years and then getting to the end of that and then moving out into work. So tell us a little bit about, I guess, that transition. What did that sort of feel like, finally getting to the end of kind of qualifying and thinking, I'm about to go and do it now?
Yeah, I think to reflect on my whole life at that point, there were other key things that happened that made me kind of stay in Huddersfield.
Yeah.
So from a personal perspective, I found my faith. We got married. So there was a lot of things that kind of anchored me in Huddersfield itself. I love the town, I love the people, I love the place as well. So there's a bit of an anchor. But then you're going on to, well, where's the job? And back then, there wasn't really opportunity to work. Fortunately, as part of my Part 3 studies, we have to kind of do that year-out placement. And there is a firm in Huddersfield, which is still here now, good firm. And there was a number of us who'd written into the firm, and I was very fortunate indeed to actually get that job as a Part 3. And actually my Part 3 project, as we talked about earlier, was actually this building here, which is the Howard Wilson building.
Wonderful. I think we'll hold that up there.
The Human Health Sciences building, which actually you can see was actually put on a postcard, believe it or not. Unfortunately, there's not a date on it, but I think it was finished soon after I graduated in the early 2000s as well. So what was that? What was that leap like from graduation into work? It was massive. For me, it was huge. And we alluded to this a little bit earlier in terms of you get nice theory, you learn the design, you learn all you need to do about architecture, and you kind of get a bit of a taste in terms of work experience and what work is like. But to actually be then that transition into it, back then, it wasn't, well, I suppose it was literally black and white. You were straight into it. And you're sitting with all these seasoned architects and technologists, and you're looking around going, me in this place, doing this project? I was very fortunate. There were a number of key individuals within the practice and directors. There was one guy called Ian Hurst, lovely man, who would, I suppose you would call it mentoring now. Back then, I don't think they really did an awful lot of mentoring. It was a case of pull your socks up, get a bit of grit and get on with it. You know, you're going to get shouted at, deal with it. You know, it's like, oh, couldn't do that now. I think times have definitely changed. And so then it was a journey. There was those people over me that actually supported me and encouraged me. There were those who were discouraging at the same time. You were always going to get that. And you're always going to get those different types of people. And for me, how do you relate to different types of people? How do you and I think we, as a society, I think we have a challenge when it comes to challenges. You know, the Instagram generation that sees everything as perfect. Well, actually, it's not. It's not perfect. And I think, well, I know that actually it's how we deal with those challenges, because actually that's how you build character. That's how you build perseverance. That's how you build the resilience. And actually, we shouldn't shy away from challenges. That actually we should look at how do we get support around us to go through those challenges. And a couple of key things that I always come back to, even now, is around relationships and communication. Those are the two core, whichever business you're in. Now, for architecture, it's really important that you get those things right. And they are really core to success in any business, in any area, that if you can learn how to relate to people, if you can learn how to communicate with people effectively. And I'm not talking about messaging, I'm actually talking about that personal face-to-face. You know, things have shifted significantly post-COVID, but actually I still come back to the core truth and wisdoms that you might say, oh, you're old fuddy-duddy, but actually they come round again. They always come round again. This personal interaction, this personal communication is absolutely vital and key. And there were moments in time when I said, actually, do you know what? Those guys aren't always going to be around. And I took a big leap to move away from where I was working to come and work at Watson Batty Architects. And it was like, well, what do we do now? And it wasn't a case I had to sit back and wait for somebody to tell me what to do. And I think a lot of this generation are, well, what should I do? What should I do? Well, that doesn't show me as an employer actually any resilience or character. What I want to see from graduates who are coming through there's a few key things. Yes, that ability to relate, that ability to communicate. What I'd like to see is managed expectations. There's still a lot of entitlement around at the moment, but actually, because I am 22, I need to be a director. Well, hang on a second. You don't, just because you're that old, and maturity doesn't come with age. We should know that. You could be 60 and still immature, but actually you need to work through the process. And it's that long-term thinking, that long-term vision that certainly for me as an employer, and I'm sure other employers will be looking at, can this person go through all these challenges? Can they grow? Can they be proactive, not reactive? Can they ask the right questions? Come back to, there's no such thing as a daft question. Wherever you are, in whatever age of life, stay curious. We talked about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back to that.
But it is about, for me as an employee, can I trust this person? Yes, they might be green. I was totally green when I came out. But I need to have some of my own initiative. I need to manage my own expectations, say, right, I'm here for the long term. I'm not going to bounce around. Because what you tend to find when people bounce around is they bounce around and bounce up, bounce around and bounce up. And at some point they will get found out. And there's a couple of guys that have come through our practice recently who've moved on and they've been found out.
Do you think there's an element within that of managed expectations from, I guess, both sides of the coin, as it were? So, because I think you're absolutely right what you're saying there around kind of maybe the oversimplification of what work involves. That we see a lot of this sort of stuff through. You mentioned Instagram, but things like Reddit as well, TikTok, where you're perhaps kind of getting the representation of certain career pathways in their most simplistic form. So missing a lot of the nuance, missing a lot, as you said, of actually the challenge that's underneath, which can definitely be a problem. Do you think there's kind of similar, I guess, expectations or kind of discord between the expectations from an employer side sometimes in terms of maybe expectations not necessarily being too high, but kind of being different to what they were when people were coming through in the early stage of their career versus what's affecting graduates now? Is there a possibility?
Yes, there is. And I guess you've got guys of kind of of kind of my age, in the 50s, that have been around the block plenty of times, and they've been seasoned and they've seen how things. And I think there is definitely that disconnect between understanding of what a graduate is coming out with at the moment, what we came out with, and actually our aspirations of what we're expecting. Now, architecture is actually really good because you do get those moments where people do come into work and do work experience.
You say it's building up over,
and it is building up over time. And I'd always advocate. And it's always this tricky balance. Always advocate. Graduate as soon as you can to get your qualifications, because sometimes you can get stuck in a year out becomes 3, becomes 5, becomes actually long term, and you've never graduated to that full qualification, and there'll be some disappointment there potentially. But also get as much experience as you can. I wouldn't say go around every sorts of things. I suppose I was very fortunate in understanding I knew what I wanted to do. There's so many graduates who come out, even Marina, my wife now, she's had a long career. She turned around and said, I still don't know what I want to do. And I understand that is a big challenge.
And it's quite normal. It is.
But irrespective of that career path, get some experience, get to understand where that sits. So that you're right, there's that disconnect. And one of the things that we try and do as a practice is bring on graduates. And actually we actually pay for graduates to go through a course, do part-time. Because that's that. And for some people, that part-time learning, when you've got some excellent mentors, and there's some guys down in Loughborough office, fabulous, really great with some of the guys. And there's one guy who's come through Sheffield Hallam University through the graduate scheme there. Fabulous, absolutely fantastic. And I can see the benefits of both. But you're right, employers need to have that managed expectation of what is coming through as graduates, but then tailoring training and support and mentoring systems in-house, which takes time and it takes money, and you're going, well, actually, what if they don't stick around? Well, actually, that's not necessarily part of the point.
Yeah.
Is actually, it's about investing into that individual. People are not investing into the business. Well, you kind of are at the same time.
There's that famous quote, isn't there, about, what if you don't invest in them, they stay. So, I think it's, and I think actually, graduates listening to this, it will be very heartening, a lot of the stuff you're saying, because you're talking about that idea of going out and getting experience, not necessarily that it has to be perfect, but that it will give you something.
Yes.
And that idea of actually the things that you can bring to the workplace as a new entrant don't have to be this, you've done X, Y, Z different courses, you've ticked all these boxes, but actually, as you said, just that ability to be able to relate to people, to come in with, ideas, enthusiasm,
and it's that right. Yeah. We've said this because we're currently looking at recruits at the moment, and one of the things that we say as directors, and certainly Peter, our MD, says is, what's their attitude like?
Yeah.
Because actually, you can train someone with the right attitude. Yeah. If they haven't got the right softwares, you know what? If they've got that ability to learn, then absolutely we want someone who's got that right attitude, who can fit in with the team, who's got that long-term thinking and mentality, who asks the right daft questions probably at the wrong time as well. But it's that ability to I want to add something of value. Yes. Yeah. And we need to be pushed as well.
Yeah.
We need those guys who are going to come in and look at, well, have you thought about this bit of software? Oh, no, what does it do? Wow, didn't know what that did. I mean, we talked previously about AI and all the fantastic opportunities there. I know recently, was it yesterday or today, the Prime Minister's all this kind of doom and gloom, and there's got to be, but I think there's got to be a balance here. Yeah. And I get that. But I'm still pushing our guys to say, well, how can this facilitate us being better?
Yes.
How can this facilitate us being more efficient in the way that we do what we do? And that's the way I see it.
And this really nicely connects, kind of leads us sort of towards maybe the kind of the tail end of the podcast, because I suppose it links back to how you're keeping that kind of passion, enthusiasm for architecture, as you said, through the kind of career that you've had, and still having that enthusiasm for looking at new technologies like generative AI, how we're sort of doing that. So I guess, does this sort of take us all the way back to the purpose angle? Is this sort of why you feel, even after kind of all of the sort of projects you've been involved in, you've still got that kind of burning desire for them?
It is, and I think that the desire's kind of changed now. It's still there, but I think you, as you come towards, you kind of see the finish line at some point. The next, we'll give it a year, but you can see that, and your thinking starts to shift and change. You're kind of thinking, well, what is the next phase of my life? And you go, well, how do I maintain that? But also, I don't want that to be lost.
Yeah. As
well. It's interesting. We were in a project interview a while ago, and somebody turned around to me and said, how do you replicate you? Because
very good question.
And it is, because so often what people buy is not necessarily the company. They're looking at the individual. Yeah. How does that individual add value to my project? Just because they're part of a practice, and many times it's about that. So it is holding on to those things that have made you who you are, those memory moments, whether it's personal, whether it's career-wise, that have brought you to this point.
Yeah.
But actually, for me now, is trying to encourage that next generation that's coming through. Push the boundaries. Push upwards. Those directors do need a bit of upward management sometimes. Yeah. And actually, you've got some great ideas. Don't hold them back. We love people who stick their heads above the parapet and say, have you thought about this? Rather than sitting back and saying, well, I don't. Can you tell me what I need to do? Yeah. No, I don't want that. And people who push and say, well, what about this plugin? What about this bit? Oh, by the way, I've done this. Is that okay? Bit dangerous, that, but I much prefer to someone to have that mindset.
But at least you've asked.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then it's how do I bottle that passion and that enthusiasm, and then try and encourage others with where they're at to try and pick up what I've caught. And it's those things that it's caught, not taught.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
it's that you getting something sort of by osmosis means it's more likely to stick, I guess, isn't it? Than if you're just somebody sits you down and says, you're going to listen to this.
And it's that revelation of they've got to get their own moment of, right, this is why I do what I do. And you can't force that.
No,
that is something that just happens. And you try and encourage that through all the busyness of work.
And I guess, as you say, it comes back again to that idea of leaving a legacy, in different formats, whether that's through a physical building, or, as you said, whether it's through kind of encouraging the next generation of architects to take on a similar mindset, passion, attitude, And as you said, I guess that's the tough bit, the bit that's worth striving for.
No, absolutely, and it's a legacy in life as well.
Yeah,
is like, what are you leaving behind? Whether it's in your family, whether it's your friends and relationships that you've got inside and outside of work, whether it's actually your work, because sometimes, again, very fortunate that we can leave a physical legacy that people can actually see and experience, which is a real, as I say, really blessed to be in that sort of position. But actually, everybody's building something. Everybody is able to leave a legacy, and I guess they've got to work out what that legacy is going to be, because then that again reiterates that drive and that passion, and to what you do and why you do it.
And I think it's a brilliant kind of note to end the podcast on. I mean, it's extremely kind of gratifying to hear someone in your position talking about this idea of adding value. We talk about a lot about that within the Careers Service, because I think often people can get bogged down, particularly kind of graduates, in terminology like being employable, which is very nebulous. It means different things to different people. But I think that idea of adding value, as you say, everybody has value to add. Everyone's building something. Everyone has a legacy to leave. What's yours? It's a great note for us to end on. If we've had any kind of graduates, students, or kind of anybody else who's been watching or listening to the podcast who's maybe interested in finding out a little bit more about you and your work, where can they sort of find you out there in the web? Or
out there in the web, yes, absolutely. So I'm a director at Watson Batty Architects. So we have a website, but obviously that's very architectural, as well, obviously. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I don't tend to connect with too many people. I
can follow you now. That's a good thing about LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely. Don't tend to post an awful lot on there. But yeah, if anybody wants to chat or coffee, get in touch. More than willing to share some of my experiences further with those who are willing to listen.
Brilliant. Well, what we will do, so if you are watching the podcast, you will see on this recording those links that Mark's just mentioned flashing up on the screen, and if you're listening, you'll find them in the podcast notes on Spotify. So, Mark, all that really remains left to be said is a huge thank you for sort of sharing your reflections today. Thank you for becoming our latest member of the Hud Grad Club, and our first member to do an in-person podcast, which is great. And obviously, we wish you kind of best of luck with everything else.
Chris, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. Enjoyed the podcast? Then go to the University of Huddersfield YouTube channel for all of our future episodes. Subscribe, like, and don't forget to hit the bell button for notifications. If you'd like to be involved in the Hud Grad Club podcast moving forward, please get in touch with us on alumni@hud.ac.uk.